Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. We are here live on the Saturday live stream, which happens just about every Saturday, and there'll be, of course, a Sunday stream as well. So today, I want to focus on the very sad murder of Rob Reiner and his wife. It was a story that sort of captured the attention of everybody. Allegedly, Rob's son Nick, who is addicted to all sorts of drugs, the legal ones and the illegal ones, and the ones that mother gives you. And he allegedly stabbed them both. So total tragedy, and lots of people have been talking about the what ifs, and we could maybe get into that on another show. But today I want to remember the legacy of Rob Reiner, particularly what it meant for music fans, because Rob Reiner directed the best music documentary, in Dr. Evil quotes, that there has ever been. And for those who know, you already know, I'm referring to This Is Spinal Tap, the 1984 mockumentary, which traced, the sights, the sounds, and the smells of a hard-working rock band on the road, which is obviously a line from the movie that Rob Reiner says, because not only is Rob Reiner the director of This Is Spinal Tap, but in the film itself, he plays the role of a director making a documentary. And of course, his name is Marty DeBerge, wearing his USS Oral Sea hat. And it is, in my view, it's the funniest movie that's ever been made. And I could be biased because it's about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, music. But I genuinely think that, objectively speaking, it is the funniest movie that's ever been made. And there are a lot of interesting reasons as to why. They decided very early on that they couldn't really write a script in a traditional sense, with characters having lines, and this character says this, and then this character says that. It was really, the film is really a creation of equals, and part of the genius of Rob Reiner is that he allowed very, very skilled and hilarious and creative improvisational actors to work in concert. No pun intended there, maybe, to develop dialogue on the spot. And that's what makes it feel and sound and smell like a very authentic fly on the wall documentary. And so, Rob Reiner, Michael McKean, who played Davidson Hubbins, Christopher Guest, who played Nigel Tufnell, and Harry Shearer, who played Derek Smalls, all worked to create something truly sensational. And I have to respond to a quick message. Just give me a second. Um, Hold on. See, this happens all the time, and this is sort of the comedy of eras of life as well. I could be 3 hours and no binging and bonging, and the minute I go live, it goes all of the binging and bonging with everything, useless messages, never anything important. And it's still going on. It is still. I wish I could share the screen with you to see the binging and bonging that's going on right now. Hold on, let me try to shut it up. Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things. I mean, the binging and bonging is really too much. Anyway, where was I? So, the film itself. So, Spinal Tap relied on these wonderful actors and Rob Reiner, who created a scenario where it was method acting that really reached its zenith. These actors became these characters, these musicians in the rock band, the fictional rock band, which then later became real with the characters playing instruments and singing and going out on the road. It traced their rise and fall as your typical, prototypical, fly on the wall music documentary tended to do. And it did it with such accuracy. And I think that really is the key, is that anyone, well, almost anyone who's talented could write a documentary that features wisecracks, good jokes, good scripts, realistic visuals. But what makes this fake documentary, so deeply authentic, in many ways more authentic than a real documentary, where the director might have a certain bias to portray a band in a certain way, is that it is not only realistic, but it is hyper realistic. The turns of phrases, the kinds of things that happen to bands on stage, but backstage in the real world, in the hotels, in the airports, the origin stories, the interactions with critics, all of it is just so realistic because everyone involved, from the actors, the main actors, to Rob Reiner himself, they had studied this rock and roll business, which in 1984 was very big business. They had studied the ins and outs of it. They had learned about real life, hilarious incidents that happened to actual bands on the road, and they incorporated a lot of it. And there wasn't much hyperbole. The Stonehenge incident, where they didn't know the difference between inches and centimeters, that happened. To Black Sabbath, a drummer being stuck in a pod, which was part of a stage design, that happened to Alan White of Yes on their Relayer tour in the mid 70s. The idea that a band, is declining, and they go from, stadiums and arenas to sharing the bill with puppets at Universal Studios, or a Universal Studios like venue, that is all too real. It's like, I've told them once, I've told them 1,000 times, say Spinal Tap first and Puppet Show lost. Is it? Well, at least we've got a bigger dressing room than the puppets. To the fact that, when their lead guitar, or when their lead vocalist and guitarist leaves, they have to go and do the bass player's jazz odyssey, a prog rock fusion improvisational extravaganza in front of a festival crowd. There's so many lines that are just capture the brilliance of a documentary, where these characters are just, they're so into themselves, they're so earnest. Like, a lot of rock stars are able to poke fun of themselves, but some of them did take themselves very seriously, and this film may well have been made especially for them. There's one line where Marty DeBurgi, the documentary maker, is speaking to the band's manager. He said their audiences are getting smaller, and the manager goes, well, I wouldn't say that they're getting smaller, they're just getting more selective. Again, I know I'm not doing it justice. It's the kind of thing that you need to see, but it's just too good. And then there are some of these great lines that have actually entered the cultural vernacular, and people that have never seen the film, maybe people who have never even heard of the film, know these lines. So the phrase "up to 11," I'm going to turn it up to 11. These go up to 11. That is now part of the cultural lexicon, and that all started when Nigel Tufnell was showing his custom Marshall amps to Marty DeBurgi in one of the scenes. And I think one of the things also that makes this film so good, in addition to the authentic deadpan delivery, is the cuts. How you go from one scene to the next at just the perfect moment. There's one great scene where DeBurgi is interviewing Nigel Tufnell. He says, "This is written in the key of D. I find D to be the saddest of all keys." And DeBurgi, and what do you call this song? Oh, this is called "Lick My Love Pump," which is, again, it's a parody of your sort of over the top, over amplified, over sexualized type of rock lyric, heavy metal style lyric from that era. And some rock stars didn't like the film, but some loved it. And I think eventually most of the real life rock stars came to love it. There's a wonderful story that John Anderson of Yes told about this, because John Anderson loved it from the very beginning. So the story goes that Yes, with their 90125 lineup, they were on tour. And one night, John Anderson goes to the movies to see this film, not really knowing what it was, but it's, it was a night off in between gigs, and they're stuck at a hotel. So he goes and sees a movie, and he comes back to the hotel and he says, "Guys, they have made a movie about us, and you all need to see it." And it is true that, like I said, the scene where the drummer, one of the many drummers, because they all meet with mysterious fates, where one of the drummers gets stuck in the pod. That is, in fact, based on, yes, drummer Alan White's experience where he got stuck in a pod and they had to drill a hole in it and pump in oxygen until they could find a way to get it open. Because, again, you had very elaborate stage sets, but sometimes they malfunctioned, and people being less, overwrought and safety obsessed like they are today, which would probably make the movie a lot less fun and funny. They thought, shit happened and you had to deal with it on the road. And you had the Yoko character. Of Davidson Hubbins' wife taking over as the manager. She didn't know the difference between recording an album in Dolby noise reduction and recording it in Dublin, Ireland. I think we should record this one in Dublin. She means Dolby. Again, these are references that if you're in the music business, if you love music, if you're a musician, if you know the music business, you will instantly see as hilarious, because just about every conversation they had, and even down to the phrases, these were real things that at one point were said in one shape, form, or another by a touring rock band on the road. Now, some people think that the film was sort of mocking the genre from a nasty point of view, saying, look how vapid, look what a waste of money, look how stupid and juvenile and socially retarded rock bands are. And I think that some of those phrases were even used in some of the fake reviews from critics that Marty DeBurgi read the band during the course of the movie. And some people thought that that was a real reflection of pardon me, of Rob Reiner and the actor's views of rock music. But I think that it's really sort of a love letter. It's sort of like a roast that instead of resorting to hyperbole, the way that, let's say, your typical Dean Martin roast host would, it's a love letter that says, we're going to be more royal than the king. We're going to go so hyper accurate that you're going to have no choice but to love it. And again, everything from the equipment on stage to the lighting rigs to the arguments with album designs. And I mean, another legacy of the film. Everyone remember Metallica's best-selling album, certainly at the time, the Black Album. Well, this was again from Spinal Tap, because when the band was on tour, they were promoting their forthcoming album, which was called Smell the Glove. And throughout the film, they were arguing about the album art, because while they never showed the original album art, the implication was that it was so overly sexual that Kmart and other major retailers at the time would not shelve it. And this was a real issue in the 80s. Remember, 1984 was when the censorship people, Tipper Gore, the Parent Music Resource Center, they were going full bore with censoring the cover art and censoring the lyrics and censoring everything. And so that, again, was a very timely and realistic expose of what was going on in terms of cover art. So they never show the original cover art, but the way that they imply that it's so explicit is very funny and very realistic. So they end up having a cover that's just completely black. And some of the lines in that scene too have just entered the vernacular. I'm looking at and I'm thinking, how much more black could it be? And the only answer is none more black. And they debated, well, I think it looks like death. Again, those who know the film will understand these references. And then there's a scene which actually I think is really one of the most underrated. So, on their way down from the precipice and pinnacles of fame, they end up playing like a Saturday dance at an Air Force base, which is, a step down from playing a headlining show in the Enormo Dome. And so one of the officers on the base who's showing them to the stage said, "Yeah," he said, "Spinal Tarp, very nice to meet you," not knowing their name, but trying to be very enthusiastic. He said, He said, "Now, could you boys do me a favor and, play something nice and slow so me and my wife can dance to it?" And again, one of these cuts, just the editing, is perfect. Slam edit, working on a sex farm, plowing through your bean field. And as this song that the audience at the Air Force Base loathed, because that was the kind of song that would have been written for a rebellious 16-year-old record buyer, not the sort of very, uniformed and well dressed Air Force officers. The remote microphones get interference from the air traffic control, which causes Nigel to leave the band. And it was after that that they have to share the bill at a theme park with the puppets. Again, all of this stuff is so like what actually happens on the road. And even every detail of the sort of epilogue when they're sort of running the credits and it's showing DeBerge interviewing them, saying, "Well, what would you do if not for rock and roll?" And so there's a scene where Davidson Ovens talks about he could sell shoes, and he says, "Oh, you think you could do that? Well, I don't know what size." And he says, "Well, what's your motto? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So what would you do without the rock and roll?" "Well, I guess the sex and the drugs would be okay." And what's another great line for that? "Oh, what's your motto? Have a good time all the time," which is sort of another one of these improvised lines from this movie that has entered the popular nomenclature. Now, I think Spinal Tap came around at just the right time, just the right place, just the right reasons. Because, like I said, Tipper Gore and the PMRC were making rock and roll and other forms of music, but rock and roll was the main line of their attack. They made it out to be some sort of plague on humanity, something that was, so dangerous. And this sort of revealed it to all be, on the one hand, big business, on the other hand, business that had similar business considerations to running a hotel or a restaurant or a used Chevrolet dealership. But at the same time, it did show that, look, it's only rock and roll. It's only a bit of fun. It's heavily amplified music with over the top lyrics for mainly young men who want to have a good time, and that you should not take it so seriously. This genre of music that Tipper Gore and her stupid friends made it seem like was the end of the world, it actually showed that it was quite innocent and very funny. And again, like I said, these were the kinds of conversations that you would hear at a rock and roll concert at the time. And so I think that it was absolutely perfect. I don't think that it was slanderous of the genre. I don't think that it made people back away from the genre. I mean, I've heard ridiculous claims that this film, which came out in 1984, was actually somehow related to the slow death of sort of arena rock and hard rock, which slowly transpired in the 90s when grunge, which is a much more stripped down and pseudo serious genre of rock, plus hip hop came to dominate the charts, while the heavy metal and hard rock and hair bands and AOR and arena bands tended to at least temporarily slip to the back of the line. I don't think that's the case at all. Too much time had passed between 1984 and 1992 for there to be any sort of causal relationship. And again, I think if anything, this would make people more excited to see rock bands, because people are naturally drawn to those who exhibit a sense of humor. And this is quite, we all know that Rob Reiner and Donald Trump didn't like each other. That feeling remained neutral literally up to and after Rob Reiner's murder. But there's something about people that just are naturally funny. Trump is naturally funny, and people are drawn to him. And I think a lot of the people that love him were drawn to him because of that humor. And likewise, rock and roll being something much like politics that we're supposed to take seriously, this film pulled back the curtain, but it actually showed something humor that makes something more endearing, more popular, more authentic, more human. So just as humor in a person, whether it's a public figure, a politician, anyone, I think the humor endears people to that figure. I think that the humor in this film and in the music, the real authentic sounding hard rock music of the time that they wrote for this film and the lyrics, I think it endeared people to the genre. Because instead of looking up on stage and seeing these larger than life people you would assume to be arrogant, you would know that behind the stage there's a manager who's a bit too smug, who's being threatened by a Yoko type of archetype that's, a bit too incompetent, jealousy within the bands, lineups that change that you can't keep track of, some albums that do better than others. The fans only want to hear the old stuff. Are we now going to go through our experimental phase as a band, and will the fans follow us? All of that stuff, super authentic, super realistic, and super funny because of that. And again, most of these great lines were improvised. There was not a traditional script. And I don't think there could have been. If they tried to script this film traditionally, I do not think it would have worked nearly as well. So rest in peace, Rob Reiner. Made so many well known and beloved and hilarious films, television. Obviously, he started on All in the Family with Archie Bunker. Everyone loved that show. But to me, his first directorial film, This Is Spinal Tap, was the finest, because for someone who loves music, it just hit all the right places, and it had that perfect combination of realistic humor and sincerity that projected from the screen to the audience. And I'll never forget John Anderson of Yes's comments when he first saw it. Guys, they've made a film about us. How many people in rock bands had that same reaction? I would say many, if not most. As always, like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.